Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Essential Works for Beginners by Composer X. And Composer X is actually Composer W. It's Wagner. And Wagner is tricky. Very, very tricky. That was my bug zapper just going off. Anyway, something got zapped. Wagner is tricky because he wrote big, long, heavy-duty operas. We're talking, 4 hours plus sometimes. And they require a tremendous investment of time and effort. And they are also surrounded by this afflatus of philosophical pretension and hagiographic cult worship that can be very off-putting for some. Now, if you're looking for a cult, this is the one you better start with. It's a terrific cult as far as cults go. I detest cults. You know that. We've been through it. And in fact, whenever I talk about Wagner, because I tend to treat him as just another composer that you listen to for pleasure, I get all kinds of hatred and vituperation and anti-Semitism, believe it or not, usually thrown in my direction, which I actually kind of enjoy because I get to ban all of those people from this channel. And at least as far as our discourse goes, I think I'm doing a duty for sort of Western civilization to just get rid of those people. But the truth of the matter is that Wagner is a great composer, believe it or not, as a composer, as a musician. The music is great as music. You don't have to listen to it for any other reason. It's simply marvelous. But in order to get into Wagner, there probably is a best entree, which I'm going to suggest one avenue. There are others, of course. One way is to simply sit down with the libretto, the words and the translation, if you need it, if you don't speak German, of these operas, and just do it. They work that way. You have to have the time. And it can be intimidating. And so I'm assuming that as a beginner, you are going to want to work your way into it because it helps to become a little bit familiar with the style, what you're going to expect. Wagner was not a great tunesmith. He really wasn't. He wrote wonderful pregnant motives, ideas, which he called leitmotif, leading motives, that he wove into a continuous symphonic fabric in his operas. Now, the symphonic element is also really overrated in Wagner, I think. And the reason is because when, I assumed when I started listening to Wagner, I heard all about this. Well, it's symphonic like Beethoven, only it's a Beethoven symphony as a music drama thing. And he coined all kinds of language to describe what he was doing. Music drama, Gesamtkunstwerk, total work of art that has, the poetry and music and drama and stuff. Wagner was a genius, but what he was a genius at was music. He wasn't a genius at anything else. He thought he was, but he wasn't. And because he wasn't a genius at anything else, and because he had absolutely no ability, being a total narcissist, to evaluate his own strengths and weaknesses, his operas have dead spots. For years and years and years, they were performed with cuts to get rid of the dull bits. And now it's customary to do them all complete. As a matter of course, and cuts really since the 50s have been considered, anathema, blasphemous. And I understand you should hear exactly what he wrote, and as long as he wrote it, you should, because it's worth it. It's worth it to get to know them. The dull bits become less dull over time once you know what's going on. But again, you can't pretend that they're not there. It's not like, I just gave a talk on essential Verdi. Verdi doesn't have dead spots in his best work anyway. Wagner always will. And he will. They occur because moments happen when he's more in love with what he wrote, his own texts, his poetry, than he is with doing the musical setting of his poetry. And for that reason, it drones on. And that always bothered me because, for example, in his opera, The Valkyrie, that's usually considered one of his most popular ones. So popular that the first act was often performed separately and as a concert thing. And it's gorgeous. I mean, it works really well as a single separate entity, even though it's part of a 3-act monstrosity lasting, 4 hours or so. And it has the Ride of the Valkyries only in Act 3. Well, you hear bits of it in Act 2 as well, but we don't have to go there. But, there are these scenes where Wotan gets very annoyed with Brunhilde because he told Brunhilde that she had to arrange for Siegfried, who is Wotan's son, Sigmund, pardon me, who is Wotan's son. Siegfried's his grandson. Again, are we already confused? Okay, there's a guy named Sigmund. Wotan is the head god. He has 2 kids, twins, Sigmund and Sieglinde, by a mortal. Sieglinde is unhappily married to a guy named Hunding. Sigmund shows up at their doorstep. They realize that they're brother and sister, and they don't care. They have an incestuous affair. This offends the goddess, Fricka, who is Wotan's nagging wife. And she convinces Wotan that Sigmund must die for the horrible sin that he has committed against the hearth and home of the revolting Hunding. So that's what's supposed to happen. But Brunhilde gets completely upset about this thing because she knows that Wotan doesn't want to do it, and she knows that he really loves Sigmund and Sieglinde. They're his kids after all. So she arranges that Sigmund should live, that she's going to help him. That doesn't go very well. Wotan shows up, gets furious, kills Sigmund, his own kid, or lets Hunding kill him, or somehow he dies, and then kills Hunding because he's just totally disgusted with everybody, and then he's really mad at Brunhilde. And so, for some reason, Wagner decides to do a guilt trip aria. It's not an aria, it's a monologue. Wagner doesn't really have arias. He has monologues, so they talk and talk and talk and talk. And you can't say the music is like symphonic in any way. It's just going. I mean, it's just not thrilling. It's important. It's important in the story of this grand operatic tetralogy, 4 big juicy operas that tell this whole continuous story. And in the scheme of the whole thing, it's not such a big deal. But you got to know the style. That's my point. There was a point to that whole rant, by the way. It's you've got to know what you're getting into. And if you know what you're getting into, then you can understand why he's doing what he's doing. And you can tolerate the bits where the characters tend to drone on and the music seems to somewhat dissipate in terms of its inspiration and onward movement. So I am starting this talk with a whole big series of orchestral pieces because Wagner, excerpts from his operas, but orchestral excerpts, overtures and other things, because Wagner was, first and foremost, an orchestral composer. He fancied himself a symphonic composer. And the operatic voices, the singing as such, while very, very beautiful and extremely singable, and he very certainly knew his vocal writing, no question about that. But the vocal parts tend to be overlaid atop this symphonic fabric. And so once you get the fabric, the embroidery is not a problem. Let's put it that way. So we begin, and this is a chronological list, more or less, basically. We begin with the Overture to the Flying Dutchman. Now, the Flying Dutchman is early Wagner. The other thing about Wagner that you need to know is that his style evolved hugely from one work to the next. It really did. I mean, he was an evolutionary, revolutionary, avant-garde composer. And his own musical progress began with rather squalid surroundings as sort of faux Italian opera with German language librettos or texts, which didn't work too well. And then finally he started to get his feet under him. And the first operas that he did that were, well, one was called Rienzi. It's a big French grand opera in German sort of thing in 5 acts. And the other is The Flying Dutchman. Now, The Flying Dutchman has a fabulous overture. And the overture really is the best thing in the opera. It really is. I mean, the story's fun. It's a fun story. You know, the Dutchman is he's a sailor. He's dead. He's sailing under a curse. It's like Pirates of the Caribbean goes to the Netherlands. Let's put it that way. And so he's dead, but, his crew is ghosts. He's waiting to be redeemed. Always has to be redeemed. That's a thing in Wagner, the theme of redemption, by a woman who's willing to sacrifice herself. It's always the woman. She's always got to die. I mean, this is very romantic 19th century stuff. It's not woke. Don't. So he runs into Senta, who has a picture of him. Somehow there's a picture of him from like some sort of book of ghost stories. And she's in love with him, even though she's never met him. And he shows up and she flings herself into the sea. And this takes like 2 hours and a bit. And who wants to wait till the end? And they, their spirits, are entwined as they proceed heavenward, and he's redeemed. So you really only need to hear the overture. Tells the whole story. It's also the most wonderful evocation of a storm-tossed sea with a ship and a motive at the beginning. Da 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 da. With the storm coming up underneath it. I mean, it's thrilling. It's unbelievably thrilling. And then after that dies down, you've got the theme of Senta. It's very sweet, a little bit tacky maybe, but very sweet. And then you've got storm stuff, and it all gets tangled, and bits of the opera to come all get woven into it, and it has a thrilling ending. And what more could you possibly want? It's lovely. And that really, if you like that, then you can listen to the whole opera, and you can listen to, more Wagner. You'll get the sense of it. The important thing about the Flying Dutchman Overture is that it has one of Wagner's most pregnant motives. Da 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 da. That's the motive of the Flying Dutchman. So whenever he pops up, you tend to hear da, 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 da. Get it? There he is. This was supposed to be a major invention. It wasn't, and Wagner wasn't the first to do it. He was the first to take credit for it and make an aesthetic principle of it. The idea of taking a theme, attaching it to an object or an event or a person, and playing it whenever that event gets mentioned or comes up or pops in. I mean, it's a good idea if you know what you're doing, and Wagner knew what he was doing. That's the point. What matters is not who did something first. What matters is who did it best. And Wagner was the best. Plain and simple. Really, he was. So then we have the Overture and Venusberg music from Tannhäuser. Now, Tannhäuser has a plot that is so ridiculous that it's almost, I can't even get into it. But the bottom line is that you have this wonderful overture. It's grand, and it has, trombones all over the place. Da 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 da. Really famous tune, right? And then there's this orgy supervised by Venus, the goddess, who for some reason has a vacation home in Germany, near Weimar. I know, it doesn't make sense, but there she is. She's in Weimar, and Tannhäuser is enthralled, or he's a minstrel. He's a minstrel, and he's beloved by, Elizabeth, who of course is innocent and sweet and has to die, because she has to die. And that's all you need to know about Tannhäuser, the story. But the music itself is famous. Well, the opera is famous because it caused a riot in France by the Jockey Club, which only came to see the opera because they were having sex with the ballerinas, and they wanted to see the ballet. And there was no room in Tannhäuser for a ballet. I mean, the ballet traditionally occurred sometime somewhere in like Act 3 or Act 2, second act it was, I think. But Wagner only had room for one at the beginning. And, the whole thing caused a riot because they came and ballet was over, and it was just a whole thing. Big, famous scandal, which, of course, the French love. And so Wagner wound up hating France. But there is a ballet that goes into Tannhäuser, which sometimes gets played and sometimes does not. And it's gorgeous. It's one of his great orchestral pieces. It really is. It's fabulous. So you want to hear the overture, but if you can, get the overture. It's called Overture and Venusberg Ballet. Get the Venusberg Ballet too. It's interesting because the Venusberg Ballet was written much later, when the thing was finally performed in France, so, a decade or more after it was originally written. And you can hear the more advanced style that Wagner employs. Although it does have castanets, because in ballet music you can't have sex without castanets. And so Wagner uses castanets, which sound very strange. They're going clickety, 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 clickety. Anyway, it just goes to show that percussion and Wagner are not always happy partners. But the music is just splendid. The overture already is splendid, but you really want to hear that ballet. So if you're going to do Tannhäuser, and it gives you together 25 minutes of continuous music, really good music. So after you do that, you're moving along in your Wagnerian apprenticeship. We go to the Prelude and Liebestod from Tristan and Isolde. Now, Tristan and Isolde is the revolutionary work of the 19th century. Revolutionary because its use of chromatic harmony, that is, dissonant harmony that is alien to the key that the music is nominally in, creates this sense of unfulfilled yearning that lasts for 4 hours, and really lasts for a long time. And I mean, the story, even Wagner said nothing happens in Tristan and Isolde, and nothing really does. They drink a love potion, and then for the next 2 or some odd hours, they yearn. And when they finally are done yearning, they both die. So there you go. And that's the Liebestod. So you hear in the Prelude and Liebestod the very beginning of the opera and the very end of the opera. And they're joined together, which doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. I mean, you could play them separately, but they work. It works fine. It works fine because the end of the opera is the resolution of what you're hearing at the beginning of the opera. So, you skip all that stuff in the middle. And the Liebestod, grandly named Love, Death, is Wagner's musical illustration of Schopenhauerian philosophy. The idea of love equals death and the will. And we don't need to get into it, do we? We really don't want to bother with it. Suffice it to say that Liebestod Wagner coined the term. It's like Gesamtkunstwerk, total work of art. German is good that way. You can take these words and make giant compounds. Like the German word for discussion, Auseinandersetzung. That means from one to the other setting forth. In other words, it's just a discussion, right? So Wagner invents these things. And the Liebestod is just this psychosomatic musical orgasm that Isolde has when Tristan is dead, because they're tied together by the potion. So when one of them dies, she immediately has this orgasmic climax that kills her. And that's what happens in Tristan and Isolde. But the music, of course, it is absolutely the most passionate music you've ever heard in your life, the most graphic illustration of the fulfillment of the sexual encounter sort of thing. It's quite something, let me tell you. And it's a magnificent work, and it was revolutionized music. It really did. So again, listen to that. If it hits you and you want to hear all the stuff that happens in the middle, go for it and take your time and like what you like and don't like what you don't like, and don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. It's your call. So after that, we go to Die Meistersinger, the prelude to Die Meistersinger. This is Wagner's only comedy. Wagner took himself so seriously. He had no sense of humor whatsoever. And Die Meistersinger is not terribly humorous. I mean, it's funny, kind of, sometimes. But the music is marvelous. Oh, see, Wagner's music it's so glorious. That's the thing. People say, someone even today wrote, how come whenever we talk about Wagner, we have to talk about what a creep he was? You notice, I'm not talking about what a creep he was. He was a creep. Everybody knows it. That's not the point. He wrote glorious music. And the music, the theme of redemption in Wagner, redeems a lot of his creepitude. It really does, because it is great music. And Die Meistersinger is about singers. It's about singing. It's an opera about music. And so it's full of musical devices. It's full of counterpoint and, learned instrumental technique. And for that reason, actually, it's one of the lightest of Wagner's pieces. The textures are very well aerated throughout the piece, and the music is just flowing and pleasant and enjoyable. I like to listen to it without the text. I just put it on and listen to it. It makes great background music. It's a beautiful, beautiful score. And the prelude, which, represents the masters parading through the town of Nuremberg on the day of the singing contest. And you hear all the tunes combined in various ways. It's just delicious. It's fabulous. And that's all you need to know. And if you like it, well, there we go. Go for the rest of it. Now, last but not least, in terms of the orchestral stuff, the Prelude to Parsifal, Wagner's last opera. Parsifal is a religious allegory. And how much you can put up with allegorical religious things will depend on, will determine, your approach to Parsifal. But the entire score is filled with this kind of luminous inner light. It's an extraordinary piece of orchestral writing. It really is. The opera is, moves as slowly as geologic time when you're in the middle of it. The whole issue is whether this magnificent, beautiful musical framework will hypnotize you into getting through the whole thing. I had a friend of mine who, I had tickets to Parsifal. I couldn't go. And I said to him, "You want to take them?" And he said, "Sure, I'll take them." So I gave him the tickets. He called me at intermission from Act 1. He said, "I can't believe I have to sit through 2 more acts of this thing." I said, "No, you'll survive. You'll make it." And he did. He survived, but it was a chore. And let's not kid ourselves. It's a chore unless you listen to this prelude and it strikes you like a bolt of lightning and you can endure the whole thing. And then it's not endurance, then it's pleasure. It's pleasing and marvelous. The music, moment by moment, is exquisite. It really is. But everybody will have their own reaction of whether or not they can endure the whole thing. I can't stand Parsifal. I love the music. But the opera itself, the story, it's about the Holy Grail and this woman who laughed at Christ, and so she was cursed. I never could understand how, Jesus and he's supposed to be so sympathetic and forgiving. Remember, forgiving and turn the other cheek and all that stuff, except where women are concerned. They get cursed. And so she becomes this, witch-like temptress who seduces men for like the next several thousand years, and all she yearns for is death. I'm rooting for her the whole way. What kind of hypocrisy is that? There's so much about that opera that annoys me. The story, not the music. And ultimately, the story matters. Wagner would say it mattered. It was a Gesamtkunstwerk. The words which he wrote were just as important as everything else he wrote or said or did or thought. So you have every right to either adore it and not worry about the philosophical implications, or ignore it and move on with your life. Either way. But listen to that prelude. Oh, God, it's beautiful. And really, really long. It's like 15 minutes long, and it's mostly very slow and very quiet, and most of the rest of the opera is going to be that way. So you've been warned. Now that you've done all of that, and you have a sense of Wagner's style and his evolution from his rather crude, rough and ready beginnings to his enormously more sophisticated later work, let's do an opera. That opera, your first Wagner opera, should be Das Rheingold. Now, some people will say that's controversial because it's the first of the Ring operas, the 4 operas that make up the story, the Ring of the Nibelungen, a wonderful mythological thing. And it's the preludial evening. Wagner described it as a big schmagegi with a preludial evening and 3 days. And you're supposed to go and spend, your 4 days, actually, including the preludial evening, as an acolyte, cleansing yourself and worshiping at Wagner's shrine in Bayreuth in his theater. You don't have to do that. You can take it however you want to take it. But the cool thing about Das Rheingold is that everybody generally agrees it's the most Gesamtkunstwerk of all of Wagner's operas. It's the one that most perfectly realizes his intentions. The music, first of all, it's one of his shortest operas. It's only about 2.5 hours. It's in 1 act. It plays continuously. And it's just incredibly fluid musically. You hear all of the motives that will come back in the next 3 operas for the first time in Das Rheingold, and they're very, very catchy. There's the Rhine maidens who are guarding the gold. There's the Rhine River. There's the gold itself. There's the evil dwarf Alberich. There's the gods. There's Valhalla. Da 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 da. That's Valhalla. There's the ring. Do, 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 do. I can't even do it. It's this twisty little chromatic motive that disturbs the music whenever it comes up. There's the curse. The ring has a curse. Do 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 da do do, like that. Goes like that. I mean, it's really fun. It's really fun, and it's an ensemble piece. It has. I mean, Wotan is the main character, but it really has no major arias for any characters. Nothing holds up the action. It really moves. And the music is just such a unity. It's fantastic. Wagner never achieved the rest of it. He couldn't. The reason he couldn't is because in all of the later operas, you have to deal with characters and character development, which means you have to start caring about what they think and what they say, which means in typical operatic fashion, the music's got to stop while they just sit and sing at each other, or sing to each other, or sing to themselves, but that's what happens with opera. It's unavoidable. Wagner was able to avoid it best in Das Rheingold. It's truly a revolutionary piece of work, and it puts together all of the ideas and thoughts that we've been talking about the new continuity of opera, the orchestral fabric carrying along the action, and being incredibly responsive to the demands of the text, always informed by the words that Wagner wrote, which are in this opera expository. You're getting to know everything for the first time. So it's not reflective. It's got action. He's giving you information. And that's what makes it so wonderful. And I think that makes the ideal introduction to Wagner, because if you listen to that, then you will be absolutely set up for anything else by him that you want. And it's a wonderful judge of what he was doing in his other works, how successful he was in approaching this ideal, and if he strays from it, why he strays from it. It's not bad that he strays from it. He strays from it for all the right reasons, because he's working to develop characterization, because the expression demands it, because the story demands it. It's all good in that sense. It really is. But you have a model, and you have a sense of what he was really striving for. And that's important, because his goal was an incredibly noble and idealistic one. And there's nothing quite like Das Rheingold in the entire operatic repertoire. So it's a great place to start, and it has a slamming ending as the gods go walking over the rainbow bridge to Valhalla. And then you can hear what happens to them in the next three operas, if that suits you. So there you go, my friends. That's your introduction to Wagner. I know that this works. I know it works. I know that it will set you up for what you need to just do it however you want to do it. But like I said, there's never one right way. There are many ways. And this way that I've devised is for a certain type of listener. And you know best whether you are or are not that type of listener. And so you'll know whether or not this is right for you. Thank you so much for joining me, and enjoy your Wagner. Take care.